Professor Chomsky, in terms of harnessing capitalism, how can we best motivate the most conservative among us to participate in the endeavor to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel and move to renewable energy?
I wish I knew. I've been, like you, trying everything I can think of. It's very hard to reach them. If you look at, I think maybe I mentioned probably the recent Yale University study. They do regular studies on attitudes towards climate change. The recent one, which I think we may have discussed, they gave people 29 options for most important issue that'll determine their November vote. They broke them up in various categories. Among moderate Republicans, climate change was 28th out of 29. Other Republicans, 29, the bottom of the list. How do you reach them? They're listening to their leaders, naturally. Trump is, the whole GOP leadership is by now 100% denialist. Either nothing is happening or we don't care. So if that's what people hear, they hear it echoed on Fox News, what are they going to believe? It's going to be hard work, ground up. I mean, it's kind of striking. I know activist friends who work in conservative rural communities, and they see their crops burning up, drought, fires. They just deny it. It just happens. We can't do anything about it. That's God's will. For some, it's sacrilegious to try to intervene.
Okay, good. Thank you. So on what appears to be Manchin's reversal or apparent reversal, the renewable energy sector may get a shot in the arm if this ongoing debate in Washington around Senator Manchin's apparent reversal on key legislation to combat climate change, now being called Inflation Reduction Act. In your opinion, what is the likely outcome of this reconciliation package?
First of all, it's not clear that it'll go through. We still haven't heard from Sinema, senator from Arizona. It's possible that she may decide to just kill it, be in the limelight for a couple of hours. We don't know. There are other conservative Democrats. As for the bill itself, it's better than nothing, but not a lot better than nothing. Manchin agreed because he got a lot of gifts. In fact, he's running to the bank happily. Profits don't get changed. As he put it, the goal is, the bill is based on the idea of innovation, not elimination. In other words, keep using fossil fuels, in fact, expand the use, but try to innovate and find out ways to maybe eliminate the poisons from the atmosphere and so on. There's some that goes into a small level of global justice and so on. As I say, it's better than nothing, but you can read today just in the paper that Manchin is gloating over the fact that it authorizes a new pipeline for gas, which will enrich the West Virginia coal barons, fossil fuel producers like him. So very much a mixed bag, but better than nothing. And if it passes, it'll be a small step forward, or much too small.
While there are groups advocating for the environment doesn't really have a voice at the table against industrial and corporate lobbies of self-interest. Is there a way to bring those interests into the environmental side and become more business savvy with decarbonization?
Well, there are groups who are trying to do it. Indigenous societies around the world, almost everywhere, are calling as stridently as they can to recognize that nature has rights. And in countries with a substantial indigenous population, like Bolivia, it's even been written into the legal system that nature has rights, and we have to observe those rights. They're pleading with us to learn how to live in harmony with nature instead of just destroying it and destroying ourselves. Well, we can follow their lead. There are others who try. Good interview with Herman Daly a couple of days ago in Truth Out, economist who's been pressing this position for many decades. There are voices, but we have to amplify them.
Okay, thank you. On the topic of exceptionalism, can you comment in general on the relationship between American exceptionalism and so-called no limits exceptionalism, in particular on the issue of climate change and renewable energy?
Well, the concept of American exceptionalism is flawed in two respects. For one, the idea is that the United States is uniquely noble. Other countries pursue their crass interests. The United States works for the benefit of mankind. It may make mistakes, anybody can make mistakes, but everything is done with benign intent. There are two problems with that. One problem is the historical record, which completely refutes it. The other problem is that there's nothing new about it. All of our predecessors in imperial violence and domination have held themselves to be exceptional. Leading British intellectuals, even people like John Stuart Mill, regarded Britain as an angelic country which stood aside from all others in its nobility. The French were orating about their civilizing mission. So for one thing, there's nothing new about the claims. It goes along with power. For another thing, it's all wrong, as history shows. But we're not breaking new ground, just doing it on a larger scale. With regard to climate, use has been an outlier. President Trump, in particular, pulled out of the Paris negotiations. The United States is one of the few countries that doesn't even have a national plan. And the problem is that one of the two political parties is 100% denialist, just reject everything. Makes it, actually, Biden had some fairly reasonable proposals in his original platform, pressed through by activist groups that were quite effective, like Sunrise Movement, the Sanders Movement, and so on. They were all cut back. GOP is 100% opposed to all of them, nothing. And there were these couple of conservative Democrats who finally led to this minor legislation. So the United States has been a kind of outlier. It ranks pretty low among countries trying to deal with it. And we ought to be at the top. Historically, we've been responsible for an enormous amount of the poison that's destroying life. And even right now, if you take a look at high per capita fossil fuel CO2 emissions, we rank right at the top outside the fossil fuel producers themselves. So we should, and also we're the richest, most powerful country in history with enormous advantages. All of this confers responsibility, which we're not meeting.
Okay, Professor Chomsky, what would you say as a leader to whom myriad people look today for answers, to young people who find themselves in the grip of despair over climate change and its extinction effects? Are proponents of renewable energy naive to claim that real hope remains because renewables are now advancing rapidly?
That's one positive sign. The cost of renewable energy is going way down. It's now more economical than fossil fuels. It's not without costs. Solar panels have costs in production, disposal, and so on. Nothing's free, but it's a huge step forward, can be greatly advanced. And that's only the beginning. There's a lot more that can be done. Our cities, for example, are environmentally destructive. The idea that people are sitting alone in a big SUV or pickup truck in a traffic jam for hours a day is lunatic from the point of view of survival of the species. We have to have cities with mass transportation, effective mass transportation, pedestrian friendly, bicycle friendly, cut back on the kind of commuting that wastes really harms your own life. It's not fun to sit for hours trying to get to work and back. Homes have to be reconstituted so they're weatherized. All sorts of things have to be done to change the society so that it can be survivable. The hopeful sign is that all of this can be done. The best analyses I know are by my friend and colleague, Robert Pollan, and his group at University of Massachusetts have done detailed, careful studies. Also have been working on the ground with oil workers and others to induce them somewhat with some success in joining into transitional programs. All of this is possible. It's a narrow window. The window's closing, but it's still open. Those who are concerned with extinction should be joining Extinction Rebellion, young people who are rebelling against extinction, and they have a chance. The door isn't closed, but there isn't a lot of time to waste.
I agree. Thank you. Okay, on foreign-made technology and tariffs, only a minority fraction of photovoltaic panels are produced in the United States. Many are produced in China and other Southeast Asian countries. Some view this as unacceptable and have supported Trump's tariffs on imported panels, while others point to the fact that the solar installation industry in the United States is nonetheless getting lots of renewable energy installed and employing many people, and will be dependent on imported panels for at least the next decade if it is to be continued apace. What is your view on this complex matter? Should we insist on only US made panels?
Well, if we do not produce what we need, the answer is not to prevent others from providing it to us. I mean, tariffs on Chinese panels just make it harder to deal with the problem. China happens to be by far in the lead in production and even high technology development. We should welcome that. That's a contribution to saving the world from destruction. What we should be doing is developing our own capacities. And take a look at the profit sheet for the fossil fuel companies. They've just come out with the profits for the last quarter. Every one of them, ExxonMobil, Chevron, today BP, they've got profits coming out of their pockets. They don't know what to do with it. Huge profits. That doesn't make any sense. These resources, financial and others, should be going into developing our own production, high-tech development of panels and other renewable energy. The answer is not prevent others from doing it. The answer is do it ourselves. The resources are here. Just look at the bloated profits of the poisoners of the atmosphere. We have a system which is enriching the most destructive elements of the society and starving the most productive ones. Well, not a sustainable system, of course.
In your talk, you outlined how a politically conservative juggernaut has now succeeded in crippling the ability of our federal government to regulate carbon emissions, and that this may well result in the annihilation of organized human life. Can you elaborate further on your own thoughts about why this is likely outcome if we don't succeed in turning the situation around? Might it be possible that the sheer economic advantages of renewables and government support in other countries will drive them to dominance even without US governmental regulation of carbon?
This goes back to the question, the first one you raised. The system is designed to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. He was quoting James Madison, framing the Constitution. And it's there's an inordinate power of concentrated economic power over the government, over policy. The case of the Republican Party is special. I think we've mentioned this in as recently as 2008. There were moves in the party to consider climate change. There was a huge juggernaut launched by the enormous Koch brothers conglomerate to bribe them, intimidate them, all sorts lobbying, all sorts of devices, which simply bought off the party. They dropped everything. They became since then totally denialist. Well, that's an extraordinary example of the power of private tyrannies, which are very powerful in the United States, but it's much broader. So there has to be a broad-based moves to change not only the way the economy functions, but even the mentality. I mean, if you think about it, it's crazy that we, in order to try to get the rich and powerful, the banks and so on, in order to get them to do something decent, we have to bribe them. You have to give them inducements to try to maybe stop destroying things and maybe help them out. You give them guarantees of risk-free investment and so on. It should be just done directly. And incidentally, it's not that these sectors of the society oppose government intervention. They strongly favor government intervention in their interest. We have what some economists have called a bailout economy. The rich and powerful do what they want. If they get into trouble, we bail them out. Just what we're using right now, high-tech computers, internet, satellites, all of that comes from massive government intervention back in the 50s and 60s. So they're all in favor of large-scale government intervention in their interest. Can't continue this way. We have to develop a much saner conception of how society should work for the benefit of people, not the profit of the super rich and powerful, and all the policies that go along with it, those that we've been discussing, many others. That requires a substantial change in consciousness, understanding, recognition of the way the world works, commitment to ensuring it'll work in a different way, kind of thing that many young people are engaged in. More of us should be helping them.
Very good. Okay, before I let you go, let me just make sure there's nothing you'd like to add about how the renewable energy sector, and in particular solar, can play a role in our turning the corner on maintaining our existence as a species.
Well, all I have to do is look out the window. I live in Arizona, sun's shining all the time. We happen to have solar panels. When we bought our house, we put up solar panels. Nothing anywhere nearby. People complain about huge electric bills. I mean, air conditioning in the summer, it's colossal. For us, it's free. In fact, it's so crazy that the Tucson Electric Company does not allow us to return extra energy into the grid. In fact, they didn't even let us put up all the panels because we'd be too economical. The potential is enormous, not just here, but it has to be exploited.
Hello, Noam. Kelly Gerling here. As you have said repeatedly, action is required. The American constitutional design have been written in order to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. This system is a designed oligarchy. Should we raise awareness about the legal precedent and constitutional principles necessary to abolish this constitution and replace it legally?
Well, Thomas Jefferson was outspoken about the fact that it makes sense to keep revising the basic nature of the society as things change. But for most of the framers, I think the idea was that it would last indefinitely. So I don't think there's, as far as I know, a basis in the constitutional system for other than very limited change through the amendment process. Should it be abandoned? Well, there is something very strange about a country being bound by the opinions of a small group of wealthy white men, mostly slave owners, 250 years ago. A very enlightened group by the standards of the time, but 250 years is a long time. Others more or less democratic societies don't function that way. I mean, the British Constitution is a couple of sentences. Everything else is just norms that have been built up over the years, not very specific. That's why when Boris Johnson did in fact close the parliament in order to ram through his version of Brexit, there was a huge uproar. It was struck down by the High Court, but because it's just not done. But the point is, it's kind of academic. There's no way to do it. There's no popular basis for it. There's this, the political parties would never permit it. So especially the small states, which have enormous power because of the structure of the constitutional system. So Wyoming has 500,000 people. California has 50 million. They have the same representation in the Senate. Small states are not going to give that up, which means unfortunately, the Republicans in the last 20 or 30 years have basically abandoned the role of a normal parliamentary party. So they're a barrier to anything. In fact, they're considering right now, and the Supreme Court may support it, efforts to turn the government into a presidential autocracy, which they'll hope to be able to run and become a permanent minority ruling party. We have much bigger fish to fry than the long-term goal of trying to significantly revise the Constitution. Might be a good thing to do, but it's not on the plausible agenda. And there are very serious threats to the limited democracy that we have. As you probably know, the Supreme Court, in its last session, announced that in its next session, it will take up a totally outrageous proposal. It's Moore versus Harper, which is calling for the state legislatures can select their own electors, no matter what the public votes. It actually has some constitutional basis, but it's been considered so crazy that nobody's ever even thought about it. Now it's coming up. Supreme Court may validate it for structural reasons. State legislatures, heavily rural in their voting support, tend to be Republican, and they may support this, which could give a theoretically legal means to just simply overturn elections. Trump, there's more like it. The last days of Trump's term in office, he issued a presidential directive setting up what was called Schedule F for civil service appointments, which in effect would turn the civil service that runs the country into a presidential fiefdom, is overthrowing laws that go back to the 19th century to create a politically neutral civil service, which is the foundation of any functioning democracy. Well, Biden reversed the order, but it's now coming up in Congress, and the Republicans will probably approve it, block anything to block it. So those are real dangers. Thinking about the Constitution is a very serious problem, but it's off in the distance.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Good.
Have a great one. Okay. Talk to you soon.